Mississippi, 1938, outside Hallows Grove. The bus dropped her off 2 miles from the school. Dust kicked behind it like judgment, and then it was gone. Miss Eunice Walker stood alone, with a suitcase in one hand, books in the other, and a letter from the Mississippi Department of Colored Schools folded in her coat pocket. She was 25, educated, determined, and utterly unprepared. Ahead, a road curving into pine-dark woods. Beyond that, Hallows Grove School for Colored Children, if it still existed at all. The trees narrowed like a throat. Shadows fell early. The only sounds, her breath and boots crunching old leaves. When the building appeared, it did so quietly. Wooden, 2 stories, whitewashed to hide rot. A rusted bell above a porch that sagged in the middle. The schoolyard was bare, the swings missing their seats. A figure waited on the steps. Miss Walker? The woman was thin, gray-dressed, with arms crossed like folded warnings. Yes, Eunice Walker, from Jackson. I'm the new. We know who you are. I'm Miss Hazel. I'm what passes for staff. The children are inside. We start early. We end before sundown. Always. Why? Miss Hazel didn't answer. Inside, the building smelled of chalk and kerosene. The children, all black, between ages 6 and 13, sat in worn desks, too quiet for their age. Eunice wrote her name on the board. No one spoke. No one smiled. One child, a girl named Lottie, stared at the door the entire time. During reading, Eunice noticed the Bible verses pinned to the wall weren't from any chapter she knew. And the 4th shall be removed, and the voice silenced. It was signed, Book of Sanctuary, 14:7. She flipped through the school's Bible. That chapter didn't exist. At lunch, she asked Miss Hazel about the verse. The Reverend wrote those, our own scriptures, you might say. You mean the pastor? He's not just a pastor. He's the one who keeps us safe. He built the choir. Choir? Hazel's face tightened. There were once 20 children. Now there are 16. That's all I'll say. That night, Eunice stayed in the boarding room upstairs. Rain tapped the windows. In the hall, floorboards creaked, but no one walked. She opened a drawer and found a crayon drawing tucked behind a Gideon Bible. 4 stick figures, crossed out in red. The caption, The 4th choir never sang. In the morning, one child, a boy named Isaiah, was missing. Probably gone to help his daddy, Hazel said quickly. They do that here. But his books were still in his desk. His lunch, untouched. When Eunice asked the class, Lottie whispered, he went with the Reverend, same as the others. After school, Eunice followed the dirt road north. At the end, a white church with boarded windows and a steeple that leaned. In front, a wooden sign carved by hand. We sing for what was taken. Inside, the pews were empty, except for 4 small robes hung from hooks. Children's robes. One hook was newly bare. Mississippi, 1938. Hallows Grove. The schoolyard was silent the next morning. Too silent. Children arrived in pairs. No one mentioned Isaiah. His desk stayed empty. His books remained untouched. When Eunice asked Hazel again, the woman shook her head. He's gone where the Lord needed him. But what does that mean? Hazel's voice dropped. Some children carry burdens. Some become offerings. That afternoon, Eunice unlocked the old supply closet. Inside, moldy books. Broken rulers, a box of hymnals. At the bottom, a water-warped journal titled The Book of Sanctuary. She flipped through. It wasn't scripture. It was doctrine. A collection of verses, some handwritten, some torn from old newspapers, all laced with punishment and praise. 4 shall be lifted to silence the wrath. The fourth choir carries no tune, only debt. He that offers young voice drowns old sin. Margins filled with names crossed out, including Isaiah. Eunice kept the book, hid it in her coat. That night, she walked the road again, toward the church. Crows scattered when she reached the steps. Inside, a dim lantern flickered. A man stood at the pulpit, tall, pale, thin white beard like tangled cotton. "Miss Walker," he said, as if expecting her. "You're the Reverend." He nodded. "Reverend Silas Kane. You've met my school." "Your school?" He smiled. "My sanctuary. Each generation brings forth a choir. Some sing, some cleanse." Eunice's voice sharpened. "Children are disappearing. They're being remembered. Each child lost brings balance. This land bleeds unless it's fed. The Lord demands offerings. We give voice so he may hear us." "You're killing them." He shook his head slowly. "I'm saving all the others." That night, Eunice dreamt of singing. Voices high, innocent, and cut off mid-note. She awoke to find Lottie standing at her door. "He came again," the girl whispered. "He said I sing too loud." The next day, Lottie didn't come to class. Hazel said nothing. The other children avoided her name. But in Lottie's desk was a folded piece of paper, a hymn, handwritten, ink still wet. "Lift me not to God, I am not ready. Let me stay with the dust." That evening, Eunice returned to the church with a lantern and the Book of Sanctuary. She searched behind the altar. Floorboards loose. She pried one open. Below, a pit. Shallow, empty robes, tiny shoes, and fresh footprints. Mississippi, 1938. Hallows Grove. The next morning, the school was quieter than ever. 3 desks were empty now. Lottie, Isaiah, and a boy Eunice hadn't noticed missing before, but whose name was scratched into the front cover of a primer. Harlan. She counted heads. 13 children. Not 16, not 20. And still, no one spoke of the missing. Hazel passed out chalk and slates. Her hands trembled. Eunice watched her, then the children, then the clock. It ticked too slow. At lunch, Eunice took the Book of Sanctuary and walked into the woods behind the school. She followed the path the Reverend always came from. Half a mile in, she found the clearing. 4 stones stood in a circle, small, carved with initials. On one, LB. Another, IM. The other 2 were blank. Fresh earth had been toned nearby. Still damp, still unsettled. A child's scarf lay tangled in the brush. That evening, Eunice confronted Hazel. "What happens to them?" Hazel stared into the fire. "We send what we must. Reverend Kane says 4 voices, once taken, hush the storm for 7 years. Storm? You're from the city. You don't know what this land remembers. Before us, before even the white men, blood in the soil. This town been cursed long before the cross came. He says it's the only way to survive." Eunice's voice cracked. "That's not faith. That's murder." Hazel looked away. No one else came back to teach. Only you. That night, Eunice boarded the windows of her quarters. She locked the door. But at midnight, she woke to singing. Faint, far, childlike. She stepped outside. No wind, but the bell above the school swayed gently. No rope pulled it. She followed the sound through the dark, to the church again. Inside, candlelight. 4 voices humming in perfect unison, but the pews were empty. The robes were gone. The voices stopped when she stepped forward. Then, one whisper, "Don't let them take her." Back at the school, she found a note pinned to her door. In red ink, "The fourth choir begins tomorrow. One more must be lifted." She knew who they meant. A child named Thomas, barely 7, too smart, too loud, too brave. She had until sundown. Mississippi, 1938, Hallows Grove. Sundown came faster than Eunice expected. Clouds turned copper. The air tightened. Inside the schoolhouse, she watched Thomas trace letters on his slate. Innocent, oblivious, the way children should be. But she saw Hazel glancing at the clock, more than once. And outside, the Reverend's car had returned. The fourth choir was beginning. At dismissal, Eunice pulled Thomas aside. "You'll walk with me today, all right?" He nodded, small hand finding hers. Hazel tensed but said nothing. The other children slipped away into the trees, silent as always. Eunice walked Thomas to her quarters, locked the door, drew the curtains. He sat at her desk, humming a gospel tune. She knelt before him. "Thomas, if someone ever tells you to sing when it's dark, don't. Do you understand?" He stared at her. They already did. That night, someone knocked. 3 slow taps. Measured. She didn't answer. More knocks. Louder. Then silence. Then the sound of rustling paper beneath the door. She waited, then opened it. A folded page. "You were warned. The voice must lift. The balance must hold. We come at dawn." Eunice wrote a letter by lantern light, addressed it to her cousin in Jackson, marked it urgent. She walked 2 miles to the post shack, banged until the sleepy clerk opened. "Mail this now, please." He looked at her eyes, nodded. Back at the school, Thomas was asleep. She sat beside him, then opened the Book of Sanctuary again. A new page had appeared. "When the teacher resists, the wrath finds two." She slammed it shut. Before sunrise, she snubbed Thomas out the back. They cut through the woods, fast, quiet, avoiding the roads. But halfway through, the trees parted, and the Reverend stood ahead. "You cannot stop what's been consecrated," he said. "You made this up," she growled. "There's no doctrine, just fear. Fear is the first teacher. Sacrifice the second. Silence the third. The fourth, the choir." She pulled Thomas behind her. "No more children die for your story." Reverend Kane smiled. "Then the land will take what it wants." Lightning struck somewhere behind them. Thunder rolled, low and guttural. A scream sounded from the trees. Not Thomas, a child's voice. Elsewhere. She ran, pulled Thomas, didn't stop. By daylight, they reached a crossroad. A car passed. She waved, screamed. The driver slowed, opened the door. Eunice shoved Thomas in. "We need to get to Jackson." Back in Hallows Grove, the school bell rang again. But this time, it cracked at the top. Split. The sound echoed wrong, like voices breaking. Mississippi, 1938, en route to Jackson. The car bumped hard over the dirt road. Eunice held Thomas close in the back seat, shielding his face as wind knifed through the cracked window. The man driving said little, only that he was heading north for supplies. "We'll stop in Jackson," he said. "You look like you need to leave something behind." Eunice stared ahead. She wasn't sure what she'd left behind wasn't already following. By afternoon, they reached Jackson. Eunice contacted her cousin, Marla, who took them in. Marla ran a small home for orphaned black children. She looked at Thomas, then at Eunice's shaking hands. What happened? They were taking them, calling it choir. Scripture that doesn't exist. Some kind of ritual, masked as salvation. Marla narrowed her eyes. "You sure it's not just old superstition?" "They had graves, Marla. Names crossed out. and one more robe waiting. Eunice gave her letter to a local preacher she trusted, Reverend Chalmers. He read the book of sanctuary she brought. This isn't scripture, it's a confession in disguise, a structure built to justify horror. He leaned back. There are towns like that, places lost before they were ever found. But 2 days later, a letter arrived, postmarked from Hallows Grove. No return. Inside, a single page. The voice must lift. If not the child, then the teacher. You sang when silence was demanded. Now the wrath sings back. That night, thunder shook Jackson. Thomas awoke screaming. They're outside! The trees are talking! Eunice ran to the window. No one there, but on the porch, a feather. Long, charred, wrapped in twine. She crushed it underfoot. The next morning, she met with a county attorney. Told everything. Showed the book. He skimmed it. You realize these are just scribbles, Miss Walker? Allegations without evidence? This town's never filed a missing child report? They don't file reports on sacrifices. He sighed. Even if I believed you, we don't go into places like that. Not unless we're called. Back at Marla's, she found Thomas sitting in the kitchen. I dreamed they sang my name, he whispered, but it was your voice. She couldn't sleep, so she walked. Midnight streets, past boarded houses, past churches still glowing. She found herself in front of a wall mural. A black child painted in song. Beneath it, someone had chalked, "Lift your voice or lose it." Eunice made her decision. She would return, not alone, but with witnesses, with faith, with light. Because if a voice must lift, she'd make sure it was heard, even if it cracked the sky. Mississippi, 1938. Returned to Hallows Grove. Eunice Walker stepped off the train with nothing but a bag of records, a prayer, and a borrowed revolver. She didn't tell Marla, didn't wake Thomas. She left a note. Don't follow me. This ends with me. The road back to Hallows Grove was emptier than before. Not quieter, emptier, as if the land itself had paused to listen. At the edge of the woods, someone waited. Hazel. You came back. I had to. Hazel's hands were raw, red. I tried to stop it once. Years ago. Lost my own girl. They took her. Said the wrath would rise if we didn't give. Eunice's voice cracked. You believed them. I still do, but I don't believe in staying silent anymore. Inside the schoolhouse, the desks were gone. The chalkboard cracked. The bell torn down and left rusting. Only the book of sanctuary remained, open on the teacher's desk. The last page had changed. When the lesson is refused, the lesson becomes the teacher. Eunice tore the page out, lit it with a match. The flames hissed. She didn't look away. At sundown, she walked to the church. It was full, not of people, of robes, hanging, still. Reverend Kane stood at the pulpit. His voice carried no anger, just inevitability. You should not have returned. You're done taking children. The land doesn't forget. Neither do I. She stepped forward, held up the files, attendance records, the false Bibles, the list of names, the letter she'd written, copied and mailed to every regional paper. I gave the world your gospel. His smile cracked. The world doesn't listen to women like you. I don't need it to. She pulled the Revo. Lightning split the roof. A tree outside crashed, and the robes began to sway. Voices rose, thin, faint, childlike. They weren't alive, but they were still singing. Eunice screamed over them. I give you no more. I lift no one else. I name every child. I break every hymn. Hazel burst through the doors with a lantern. She hurled it. The altar ignited. Flames climbed the walls. The rogues curled in heat. The book burned. And for the first time in years, silence. Outside, dawn broke. Eunice and Hazel stood by the ashes. "You didn't kill the lamb," Hazel said. "No," Eunice replied. "I just told it no." Mississippi, 1938, after the fire. They called it an accident. That's what the county paper said about the blaze at Hallows Grove Church. But no one in the town asked questions, and no one tried to rebuild it. Eunice stayed, not because she had to, because she refused to leave ashes untended. She taught what remained of the children in the schoolyard, beneath trees that no longer whispered threats. Hazel helped. She smiled more now, though her eyes carried the weight of too many names. The Book of Sanctuary was gone, but Eunice had written its true story, in her own words, on real paper, bound for real libraries, and stamped with her name. Weeks later, a car pulled into town. State inspectors. Suitcases of questions. They'd read the letters. Some printed, some handwritten. Eunice gave them the list. She gave them the pit. She gave them the altar's remains. They didn't speak much, just took notes. But she watched one of them, a young black agent, pause longest at the tiny shoes they'd found in the earth. He didn't look away. In time, people from outside came to help. Not missionaries, not saviors, just readers, activists, listeners. They painted a mural where the church once stood. Children in a circle, eyes open, hands clasped, and no one crossed out. Beneath it, the new choir sings for no one's God. One Sunday, Thomas asked Eunice, "Was I really supposed to be the fourth?" She paused. "You were supposed to be a child. That's all." Hazel left a letter on Eunice's desk before she departed town. "I was born into fear. I taught it like it was love. You gave me another way. Let that be my offering." Eunice began writing again. Essays, testimonies, a book. It didn't get published right away, but it spread. Hand to hand, classroom to classroom, mother to daughter, and across the South. In small towns where silence once ruled, new teachers arrived, some young, some tired, all carrying names, and none of them afraid to speak. Jackson, Mississippi, winter 1939. The university library smelled of dust, ink, and quiet defiance. Eunice stood before a podium inside a small lecture room, not a church and not a courtroom, but a place where voices were meant to be heard. She read aloud. The Book of Sanctuary was never holy. It was a ledger, and like all ledgers, it recorded what we were willing to lose and who we chose to forget. 10 people clapped. 2 cried. 1 asked her to sign their copy. Later that night, alone, she opened her personal copy. The pages smelled faintly of char. In the back, where she'd once written the names of the missing, she now added something new. And those who would have sung had we not listened. She was asked to teach a series at a nearby college, Inherited Silence and Rural Faith. In her first lecture, she showed a drawing, one of the few saved from the schoolhouse. 4 stick figures, all with mouths drawn wide. "Who drew this?" a student asked. "I did," Eunice answered. "After I stopped being afraid." Word spread. Not fast, not loud, but it reached places. A small church in Louisiana took down a false scripture. A school in Alabama replaced its hymn books. A teacher in Georgia wrote Eunice to say, "They said I couldn't teach that truth, but now the children ask for it by name." One night, Eunice received a parcel. No return address. Inside, a copy of her book, heavily marked. Margins full of red ink. Anger. Challenge. fear. But on the last page, I still don't believe you, but now I know why I don't. A son of Hallows Grove. She held the page in her hand, then wrote back, "You don't have to believe me. You just have to listen." A new generation came, some of them angry, some already scarred, but all of them loud. Eunice taught them how to read between lines and how to write in the margins, especially in blood, especially when someone tried to erase them. Back in Hallows Grove, the old foundation of the church sat untouched. But on the slab, someone had carved, "We remember who sang." And beside it, a new voice, in chalk, "Now we sing back." Mississippi, 1943, Hallows Grove. There was no choir anymore, but the school stood again. Fresh paint, new windows, a bell that rang without fear. Eunice returned for the first time in 4 years. She stepped from the train with a suitcase of lesson plans and a satchel of her own books. No Reverend waited, no Hazel. Just a small child holding a sign that read, "Welcome, Miss Walker." The children were louder now. They laughed, ran, spoke when spoken to, and sometimes when not. Eunice smiled. She taught them history that wasn't just about pain, and reminded them silence is never neutral. She visited the ruins of the old church. Wildflowers had grown through the floor. Someone had built a bench. On the bench, a journal. Inside, pages written by other teachers, travelers, even students. Every one began with, "I was told not to come here, but I did anyway." One entry stood out. "My grandmother was taken. My mother never spoke her name. But I found it in your book. Thank you." The state placed a marker nearby. It read, "In memory of those lost to silence." And to the woman who refused to let silence win, Eunice wept when she read it, not from sorrow, from knowing the silence had a boundary now. Thomas, now 12, returned with Marla. He was taller, still quiet, but only when choosing. He ran to Eunice. "You were right," he said. "My voice still works." She smiled, "And it always will." That evening, they held a gathering, not a service, a reading. Children stood one by one. Each read a name. Each read a verse of their own making. Some were sad, some funny. One child sang. No one was lifted, no one removed. All stayed. And when the sun set, the bell rang one last time. This time, not as a warning, but as welcome. Mississippi, 1943, Hallows Grove. The morning bell rang like memory uncoiled. Eunice Walker stood at the edge of the schoolyard, sunlight catching in her glasses. The children chased each other around her. The trees didn't whisper anymore. They simply stood, tall and watching. No shadows waited at the edge of the woods. No rituals behind doors. Only classrooms, only voices, only life. Inside, she wrote today's lesson on the board. History is what happens when silence fails. At lunch, Thomas brought her a book, his own, handwritten, thread-bound. It's about a place where no one forgets, even when they try to. She turned the first page, dedicated to Miss Walker, who stayed. A reporter visited from Jackson, wrote an article titled, "Where the Choir Was Silenced, New Songs Rise." Eunice sat for a photograph, surrounded by students, arms around her waist, smiling. She didn't smile for cameras often, but that day she did. The state approved a grant. The old church site would become a memorial garden. At the center, a stone inscribed with 20 names, 4 highlighted in gold, a final line beneath them. And from them, no more were taken. That night, Eunice walked alone past the school. She stood where the Reverend once stood, where the bell tower loomed. But now, only sky. She whispered, "Are you listening now?" No answer came, none needed. She returned home and opened her notebook. On the final page, she wrote, "They built a choir to control. We built one to remember. They took children. We teach them. They erased voices. We amplify. If the land holds memory, let ours be louder." She closed the notebook, folded her hands, and listened to the silence, to the absence of grief, to the chorus of presence, and no one was taken.